Welcome to the Universal Principles chapter. In this chapter, we are going to talk about the universal principles that stand at the roots of almost every culture and are used multi-level. One of these levels for our field of reference is architecture, and then the transformation of the scenery through a set of changes that man has done, also in the interpretation of these principles. First, we can observe that the principles derive from realities of the inner nature. As we can see in this picture, the galaxy starts from a focus and expands itself in a spiral-shaped way inside the cosmos. This refers to the fact that nature has always a start from the center, which develops itself in a radial way. We can find this center feeling within various fields and architectonic typologies in several cultures. During my travels from a continent to another, I realized that man has a pulsing heart and in some way feels nature principles in the same manner everywhere. Later, the interpretation of these principles develops in different ways. For example, the beat and upbeat of the pulsing heart is linked to a principle which ties to nature as a perpetual transformation from full to empty, from expansion to contraction. So this feeling, which is linked to the center archetype that stands inside man, is passed on within and confined spaces created by his own. Inside nature stands the center principle which begins and from which all the rest is manifested. In this second picture, we are in a small town, Palombara Sabina, in Lazio. It is curious to see how the radial disposition of this small town demonstrates this principal concept that I just enunciated, as to say that its reality is visualized by man from the center of the town to its periphery. In this case, in urban transformation, we can find a church and the city hall inside the nucleus that later has developed itself in the following urban configuration of the small town. Of course, we find this principle in several cultures. In the middle of American Indian villages, we find the totem, or the holiest and the most important representation. An interesting thing that makes us curious is that the town is not equal in its parts. The center characterizes a larger relevance, a feeling of bigger importance that man gives to this area. Going on about the center, we can see the second picture of the Borobudur temple in Java, which represents the Buddhist vision of cosmos, three cosmic levels represented by many passages given by the steps that underscore evolution levels. In the temple there are different small chortems around the big central chortem that portray the wheel to represent the cosmic principles linked to the center. What we begin to observe, besides the fact to see number 3 developing itself in his interior, motif that is repeatedly used by different cultures and religions as Trimurti or Christian Trinity, is that the religious belief, Buddhist in this case, which determines 3 ascension levels, mold the architecture in a specific way. The interesting thing is that from this center we begin to catch a glimpse of the 4 lines. These 4 lines stand where the steps go down, and these are situated in the 4 cardinal directions. For this, furthermore, the center, there are cardinal directions too. Also, temples' portals were very often oriented in these 4 directions: north, south, east and west. Let's take care about these important concepts. Rather now, watching this picture, it is curious to observe that we keep on rolling around Earth. If we might take this picture with a long shutter speed and an open diaphragm, we would see stars spinning in this way. The center of these stars is oriented more or less to the polar star. But in the reality, this center is moving to Vega, event due to the movement of the Earth axis, called equinoxis precession, one of the Earth revolutions. By the way, what is interesting is that we keep on moving unwittingly to a center. In these studies, we have to always think about the long period effects that are impossible to see in the short period, but that have an effective importance in the long period. We can say that in the long period on Earth, there is a perpetual centrifugal and centripetal force that works both in the cells and in the space in which we live. So we can say that center is something we live in an innate way. As a matter of fact, also the electron that rotates around the nucleus represents these two forces that express physical and gravitational forces, and the other forces and rules described by modern physics. The interesting thing is that these forces continually involve us and enter in a symbolic representation weave that we suffer and live on. During my travels, for example in India, I saw how temples could be mostly structured in this way. We find the gopurams, which are the portals that pre-announce temple enter, positioned in the four cardinal directions, and that slowly descend to the center of the temple. This temple is in Tamil Nadu and is named Sri Ramgam. It is a very well-known temple, and visiting it can be very interesting. From the outside, gopurams show a set of symbols and holy proportion for Indian language. In our Occidental world, we have proportions that are based on the holy cube or golden proportions. Here instead, we have more kinds of proportions whom are linked to the relation with human body, and a set of knowledge that we will observe later. As we were talking about, the interesting thing is that these portals keep on decreasing to the center. This for the reason that pilgrims have to feel the sensation that more we go closer to the center, the deeper side of reality, more this reality becomes immanent, not visible and not striking. So the non-visible thing concept is represented in a special, symbolic and planning way. Inside the nucleus we find a small temple in which stands the divinity Vishnu. As Occidental man, I could not enter in this small temple. By the way, I took this picture from outside, which represents what I would have seen inside. It is interesting to observe the 5 heads of the snake, where odd numbers are used. This fact is common in several cultures. Odd numbers are often charged, stronger, with a more dynamic effect within the planning than even number. It is also interesting to delve into this subject because in Chinese culture too, odd numbers are masculine and even numbers are feminine. This polarity stands just to characterize odd numbers with a more dynamic quality. You can also imagine how 2 columns create a static dynamism. 3 columns create a spiral-shaped evolution within the thin space. Spiral is already a transformation, evolution, and movement element. It is well known how odd numbers as 3, 5, 7, and 9 were used in several cultures as holy numbers that have symbolic effects of transformation and evolution. in reverse of even numbers that determine a certain steadiness.